Hey everyone, and welcome back to Sip and Talk. You ready to dive deep with us again?
Always. What are we getting into this time?
Okay, so get this. Would you rather save a cat or a priceless painting from a burning museum?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
I know, right? And apparently it caused some serious debate on that Chinese show, Cherry, with Kevin Tsai.
I can see why. It makes you think about what really matters to us humans, like how we rank our values.
Exactly. It's like, is a life more important or a piece of cultural history? We brought in a bunch of sources to help us break this down.
Lay it on me. What have we got?
So there's some articles analyzing that Terrier debate. Then we've got parts of Michelle Wooker's book, You Are What You Risk. Have you heard of it?
I have, yeah. It's a great read.
And to round things out, some research papers about how animals think, like animal cognition.
I love a bit of brain science. So are we team cat or team painting?
Well, first let's hear what each side has to say, right?
Right.
So Team Save the Cat, they're all about how precious life is,
Yeah.
They say we can't replace a living being.
Yeah, and they emphasize that animals can feel pain and fear. It's not just instinct with them, especially cats.
Makes sense. No one wants to see a kitty in distress.
Exactly. Plus, they bring in some research showing that animals, particularly cats, have more complex emotions than we used to think.
Really? So it's not just about survival instincts, but actual feelings.
That's what the research suggests. And then they hit us with the story about a person in California who risked their life to save their cat from a wildfire.
Oh, wow. That's intense.
It is, right. Shows how strong that human-animal bond can be.
Okay, so that's Team Cat. All about compassion and valuing every living being. What about the Save the Painting side? Are they all just art snobs with no feelings?
Not really. I mean, they make some interesting points, too. Their big thing is the cultural value of art. A masterpiece, they argue. It represents human history and our collective memory, things we can't just recreate.
So it's not about the object itself, but what it symbolizes.
Exactly. Like, think about that fire at Notre Dame. They rushed to save all those relics and artifacts. It was about preserving history.
True. Imagine something happened to the Mona Lisa. That would be a huge loss for the whole world.
Exactly. And you know that You Are What You Risk book.
Yeah, the one by Michelle Wooker.
Yeah. Well, she talks about these things called risk fingerprints. They shape how we make decisions, especially in emergencies.
Risk fingerprints.
Yeah. So basically, all of our experiences, cultural background, even personality, they all contribute to how we view and react to risk. So someone who's super cautious, maybe they had a bad experience with fire before, they might instinctively save a life first. Seeing someone or something in danger is just too much for them.
I can see that, yeah. But someone who's passionate about art, who sees meaning in those brushstrokes, they might feel more drawn to save the painting instead.
Exactly. It's not that one choice is inherently better or worse. We just approach these dilemmas through our personal values and experiences.
Wow. So even in a crazy situation like a fire, our brains are doing these lightning-fast calculations based on all this stuff we're not even conscious of.
Pretty much. It's like a subconscious tug-of-war between logic, emotions, and all these patterns we've developed. Makes you wonder if we ever really have control over our choices, especially under pressure.
Mind blown.
And the Save the Painting people, they had another point about the benefits to society as a whole. Like, saving a valuable artwork could have cultural and economic benefits.
I see, like how a famous museum brings in tourists and money for a city.
Exactly. They even talked about the fire at Moscow's Pushkin Museum back in 2022. The staff prioritized saving the paintings, and it helped the museum bounce back quicker, which was good for the whole community.
So the art has a ripple effect, huh?
Hmm?
That's interesting.
And get this, there's research showing that art can actually trigger long-term memories and even shape our collective identity. Saving a painting, in a way, could be like saving a piece of who we are as a culture.
Wow, this is a lot deeper than I thought. But how can we bring these two sides together? It seems like they're totally opposite.
That's the million-dollar question, right? And that's where Michelle Wooker's idea of a moral triage comes in. She says in her book that in extreme situations, we might have to make impossible choices.
So, like, you can't save everything, so you have to choose.
Right. It's about assessing the situation, figuring out what might happen with each choice, and trying to make the most ethical decision you can with what you know at that moment.
No pressure.
Right. And you've got to wonder if different cultures would approach this moral triage in different ways.
Yeah, like some cultures might put a higher value on individual life, while others prioritize preserving cultural heritage or taking care of the community as a whole.
Totally. It's not just about cat versus painting. It's about this whole web of values and beliefs that influence our choices.
You always blow my mind with this stuff. This is why I love doing these deep dives with you.
Me too.
Well, listeners, we've thrown a lot of information at you, so let's take a quick break to let it all sink in.
And while you're at it, check out the Mickeytolife YouTube channel. They've got some fun travel stories, whiskey reviews, and unboxing videos.
A little something for everyone. We'll be back in a bit for more of this cat versus painting debate. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to Sip and Talk. Before the break, we were talking about how our risk fingerprints and cultural values shape how we react to this whole museum fire thing.
Yeah, it's crazy to think those split-second decisions could say so much about us, like deep down.
It really does. Makes you wonder if we're kind of wired to react in certain ways based on our past. Does free will even exist?
Whoa, no, that's a bit too deep for me. But it does show how complex this whole debate is. It's not as simple as logic versus feelings. There's so much going on under the surface.
Totally. Remember all those what-if scenarios we talked about? They really show how different situations could change the ethical balance.
Right. Like, what if the art is brand new instead of super old? Or what if the cat's a stray instead of a pet? Does that make a difference?
Those are such good points. It just gets more and more nuanced the more you think about it.
And how do you balance saving one life versus something that could impact lots of people? Like, saving a cat saves that cat, but saving a painting could impact future generations.
That's the big question, isn't it? How do we even compare the value of a life to the value of cultural heritage? Is one automatically more important?
Tough question. But then some people say that art can become like a living thing itself.
I see what you mean. Like, a powerful piece of art can make people feel so strongly and be interpreted in so many ways over time. It's almost like it has a life of its own.
Exactly. Plus, there's that whole bioart thing where artists use living stuff in their work.
Right. Imagine a plant that's genetically engineered to grow into a sculpture or bacteria that make light and create a musical composition.
Whoa, that's trippy. Blurs the lines between art and life, for sure. So would saving a living piece of art be like saving a life?
Now that's a question for the philosophers. Adds a whole new dimension to this debate.
Speaking of new dimensions, remember that technology angle. What if we had AI robots that could make these life or death decisions in emergencies?
Like those thought experiments, but in real life. Imagine a robot with super sensors that can figure out how valuable the art is, the cat's chances of survival, even if it's risky for human rescuers.
Okay, that's kind of cool, but also kind of scary. Would we be okay letting a computer make those kinds of choices for us?
That's the thing. Would we trust an AI to get it right, especially when there isn't one right answer? And how would an AI even understand human values and emotions, which are a big part of this dilemma?
Yeah, and could it take into account different cultures and how they see those values? Sounds like a whole other can of worms.
For sure. But these are the kinds of questions we need to be asking. Technology is changing so fast, it's going to keep challenging our ideas about ethics, responsibility, and what it means to be human.
True. Even if we don't have all the answers now, it's good to keep talking about it. And maybe thinking about these hypothetical situations can help us make better decisions in the real world,
It's like training our brains for ethical dilemmas.
Exactly. We're getting ready for the ethical marathon. But instead of running shoes, we've got critical thinking and self-awareness.
Love that. But before we get too carried away, there's something else we haven't talked about yet.
Ooh, hit me with it. I'm all ears.
What if, instead of trying to pick one to save, we focus on stopping these situations from happening in the first place?
Whoa, that's a different way of looking at it. You mean like better fire safety rules in museums or new firefighting tech?
Exactly. Or even designing these buildings so they're less likely to be destroyed. Instead of asking, who do we save? We ask, how can we protect everyone?
Now that's thinking outside the box. It's about being proactive, not reactive.
And realizing that sometimes the best solution is to prevent the problem altogether.
This has been so interesting. We've covered so much, but it feels like we've only just scratched the surface.
There's always more to learn and more viewpoints to consider. We've really been putting our brains to work today, haven't we? This whole cat or painting thing, way more to it than meets the eye. Yeah, no kidding. We've gone from animal feelings to these risk fingerprint things to AI robots putting out fires. Quite the journey.
I know, right?
But one thing's for sure, there's no simple answer. It all comes down to what each person values and how they balance different things.
Totally. And those values, they can change depending on the situation, what we've been through, even our culture.
That's what makes it so interesting to talk about. Makes you look at your own beliefs and biases. Like, would we feel differently if it was our own cat in danger? Or a painting we made ourselves?
Good point. It's like that idea we talked about. Maybe someone else should make the decision, someone who's not personally connected to the cat or the artwork.
Yeah, a professional, ethical decision maker. That could be a job in the future, who knows?
Maybe. But even then, the big question is still there. How do you weigh a life against our cultural heritage?
And what about those blurry areas where it's hard to tell what's art and what's life, or what's good for one person versus the whole group? It's tough, definitely. But I think wrestling with these hard questions is important, It helps us understand our own morals and how we handle these dilemmas.
It's interesting. We start talking about a museum fire, but this applies to so many things in real life.
Oh, absolutely. Whether it's making big choices in our personal lives, figuring out ethical stuff at work, even just trying to be a good person in the world, knowing our values and how they affect our choices is huge.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And I think that's the big takeaway from all this. It's not about finding the right answer. It's about thinking things through and being open to different points of view.
Exactly. And even though data and technology are becoming so important, we can't forget about human judgment and empathy.
So true. True that. Well, that's all the time we have for this episode of Sip and Talk. But before we go, I want to leave you with a final thought.
Let's hear it.
Remember those risk fingerprints we talked about? I challenge you to think about your own. How do your experiences, your culture, and your values affect how you see risk?
And how would those things influence your choices in a situation like we've been talking about?
Exactly. Next time you see a news story about a fire or a disaster, imagine yourself being there. What would you prioritize and why?
It's a good question to think about. And remember, there's no right or wrong answer. It's about understanding yourself and what guides your decisions.
Well said. Don't forget to check out the show notes for links to all the cool stuff we talked about.
And as always, we want to hear from you. Tell us what you thought on social media.
Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring. There's always another deep dive waiting.
Cheers.